Okay, welcome to the U.S. Conference of Mayors and Verizon Roundtable Series. I'm Andy Sherwer, Editor-in-Chief of Yahoo Finance, which is a division of Verizon Media. We're hosting weekly roundtable discussions throughout the month of October featuring key mayors and CEOs engaged in dialogue on some of the biggest challenges facing America's cities today. This series is called A National Discussion on Achieving an American Breakthrough. Some of the topics we'll cover include economic recovery, which we'll be discussing today, dismantling racism, COVID-19 and health equity, eliminating poverty, and achieving public safety and justice for all. Let me bring in Hans Vestberg, Chairman and CEO of Verizon, for opening remarks. Hans.
Thank you, Andy. And as you said, today we kick off a national discussion of achieving an American breakthrough. It's an honor for me and Verizon to co-host this with the United States Conference of Mayors. And I would like to start by thanking the mayors that are on today, but also the President, Mayor Fisher, and the CEO, Tom Cochran, for helping us to set this up. It's an exciting discussion we're going to have in front of us, and today's discussion is going to be around economy and the economic recovery. And we have a great panel of experts here. We have Mayor Sylvester Turner of Houston and Mayor Kate Gallego of Phoenix. And we will soon have Mayor Amir Garcetti of Los Angeles joining us as well. And we also have some of my colleagues from the private sector. We have David Gitling, the CEO of Carrier, and Joe Berchtold, President of Live Nation. So this is a great conversation and, of course, a very important topic. As we all know, we are facing three crises at the same time. The pandemic is taking lives. And then we have the economical downturn. And then we have the racial injustice, all of them at the same time. And I think that one thing we've learned is that technology has been extremely important in order to keep communities, friends, companies, and organizations together. And we couldn't have done it without that technology. And of course, we work at Verizon, so we understand it. But it's also a risk that a divide is actually being larger in times like that for the ones that have access to the technology. I have a long time discussed with many constituencies around the globe that the 21st century's infrastructure is mobility, broadband, and cloud. Because if you use them right, it doesn't really matter where you're born and where you come from. You will have access to the same information. We're not really there yet. And that's why these type of conversations to create growth again and economical recovery will have a piece of that infrastructure in it in order for us together to come there. And it's never been more important to work together in the private and public sector to make this happen. Because one of us cannot do it. We need to do it together to see that we can really get all our constituencies, all the citizens having a fair chance in times like this when we have more challenges than we've ever had before. So I'm really excited to have this conversation today with this distinguished panel and also listening to the question come from mayors, how we can do this even better. And I also want to thank all the mayors for the work you have done during these unprecedented times. It's a really tough times we're passing through for our citizens, and I know you're fighting there every day to do it great for them. But I also think that we have more to do together in order to make that happen. So I'm happy that you all are gathered here to have this conversation. And as Andy said, we're going to have this conversation every week in October on different topics. And it's all about how can we learn from each other, the private and public, doing it better. We understand that we from the private sector has a huge responsibility. We're large employers. We have an impact on our employees. We have impact on our supply chain. We have impact on our societies where we live and work in. So I'm happy to learn from all of you what we can do more and take our responsibility, but also the collaboration that I'm looking forward to have with many of you. By that, I would like to hand it over to the Mayor, Greg Fisher of Louisville, to say his remarks.
Thank you, Hans. I really appreciate you, Verizon, for hosting this series here. I just want to say thank you on behalf of my fellow mayors. You guys coming to put all this together. These are critically important conversations at this point in the history of our country. I also want to say thanks to my fellow mayors and to everybody for joining us here today and recognizing the importance of this topic of economic recovery at this moment in America. Hans, you mentioned a couple challenges that we have, but I'll throw a few other on there as if we didn't have enough. It's an incredibly challenging time for big cities, for small towns in our country when you put together the COVID-19 pandemic and certainly the economic downturn. Many cities are seeing a rise in violent crime. Also, the protests for racial justice are taking place in more than 2,000 cities they have and towns across our country, already opening up all types of new opportunities for us. The climate emergency is impacting different parts of our country, from fires to hurricanes to floods that are going on. Income inequality and the wealth gap are widening during this time of the pandemic. And then, of course, you throw globalization and technology on top of that and the way they're impacting our lives and the workforce and the economy. That's just a couple challenges we have right now, Hans. So I'm sure there'll be more that are added on to that. And then if that wasn't enough, we also have a presidential election right now. And that is presenting all types of stimulation for all of us as we think about who we're going to be voting for in November and what our country is going to be looking like both domestically and around the world after this election. So when you put all this stuff together right now, it's obvious that we're not going back to any kind of old normal, if you would, that was here just 6 months or so ago. We've got to really focus on what this moment looks like for us and how we can create a new country and new cities as we move forward together. And it's clear that people are engaged like never before, particularly in the area of racial justice and equity, on us redefining who we are as a country, making up for 400 years of systemic injustice in America. So it's up to us to create the future, whether you're an elected official or whether you're a private citizen. We do know there's only one way that we can do that, and that is doing it together. So it is definitely a time for new paradigms. It's a time for transformation, one that not only strengthens us, but makes us more compassionate as well, and a more equitable country than we've ever seen before. So in short, that's why we call this year for the U.S. conference an American breakthrough. It's time for an American breakthrough, and that's what the members of the U.S. conference are working on. So the American breakthrough is a mayor's agenda that's a bipartisan roadmap to guide our cities and our country forward. Many mayors participated in creating this document. I want to thank our mayors who chaired the Economic Recovery Work Group. Two of them are with us right now, Mayor Sylvester Turner, Mayor Kate Gallego, and Mayor Amir Garcetti of Los Angeles will be joining us here in a few minutes. Mayor Gallego, obviously from Phoenix, and Mayor Turner from Houston, some great cities here in America. And all mayors, we're used to challenges, but in those challenges, what we see is opportunity. And today's conversation is about how we seize this opportunity in a way that ultimately produces a healthier economy that provides every American with access to careers and financial security, opportunity, and hope. And that's what we're working to create. And I appreciate the partnership with everybody on this call. And now we'll throw it back to Andy to take us from here. Thanks again, Hans and Verizon.
Thank you so much, Mayor Fisher. Let's get this conversation going. Before that, though, I do want to encourage all the mayors who've joined the webinar to submit questions, which you can do on the right-hand side of your screen. And please note that only the mayors questions. Also, on the bottom left-hand side of the Blue Jeans platform, you have a viewing option and a slider where you can size the presenting screen as well as the guest and host video box. Today, I should point out, today's event is also being live streamed on Verizon and the USCM's LinkedIn pages, so please share this event. So let me bring the first question over to Mayor Gallego of Phoenix, and I want to ask you, Mayor Gallego, about the digital divide. And of course, part of what's happened during COVID is we've all been working from home or studying from home, a huge change in the way we work. It's accentuated problems and also opportunities. What are some policies that cities can and have pursued to bridge the digital divide, and how can they work best with the private sector to accomplish that?
Thank you. Thank you for the great question and for convening this important conversation. The digital divide has been a huge issue for us in the city of Phoenix. All of my city council are parents, and most of us with kids at home. I can say we appreciated teachers before, but now when you have to be an elected official and teacher at the same time, it certainly gives you even more love for our amazing educators. We at the City of Phoenix do not run our school district, and we actually have 29 different districts in the city, which have a variety of different challenges. Some, particularly in our lower income communities, really struggled with the connectivity issue, and we have tried to partner with them and our private sector on how we can get Wi-Fi and tablets out in the community. Starting with our public housing residents who have school-age children, we've been distributing tablets that have 2 years of Wi-Fi. We also have a neat partnership with AARP and Experience Corps where some of our older adults get tablets connected with our kids and also continue and do that type of activity they used to do in person, including one-on-one reading, but now in a more digital format. We're trying to work with our community colleges as well to just get that access out there. Our private sector partners have really stepped up, in some cases, cable companies saying we can really work with you on costs. We've also had mobile providers who've been willing to invest in the communities that need help. Verizon has been making major investments in the portion of our city that has been hit hardest by COVID-19, a community called Maryville. Hardworking folks who are essential workers in many cases and have been out there. And we want to make sure they have great access to connectivity, that their kids can continue and that they can continue. I do have to say, as a mom, there have been moments where I don't know what I would have done without Wi-Fi and connectivity, just trying to teach and learn new skills myself. Also, my son is very interested in, at the moment, dinosaurs, and I hope you won't all be disappointed in me, but that was not an area of expertise of mine previously, and I've been grateful that there are resources online to help him stay engaged in learning. As long as he's learning math and reading, I'm happy if the subject revolves around dinosaurs, but just keeping him engaged and so that he's not part of a generation that ends up too far behind. Unfortunately, as mayors have seen all too well, the gaps we saw before are getting even worse, but cities have done a great job stepping up and being partners, whether it's using our fiber that we have to connect our traffic signals or our school districts to try to address this, and grateful for the U.S. Conference and Greg Fisher for highlighting those success stories. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Gallego. I see we've been joined by Amir Garcetti. Welcome, Mayor Garcetti. Nice to see you.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
We'll get to you in 1 second, Mr. Mayor, but I want to follow up and go to Hans. And I also do want to bring in the other private sector guys. Dave, Joe, we'll get to you. We won't let Hans get all the airtime here, but it's what his expertise speaks directly to what Mayor Gallego was talking about, which is the digital divide. So I did want to go to him right away. And Hans, what can the private sector do short of just listening to the public sector ask you for money? How can you actually get together and work with these guys?
First of all, I think this is an extremely important problem. And we talked about it before. This pandemic and this economic downturn can make the divide even bigger in our society. And of course, that's what I've seen in my previous life when I was heading up a super global company that had the operation in 180 countries with technology. And I think that what I really think we can do together is, of course, first of all, understanding what Mayor Kate said about the accessibility. Is it enough broadband around to get access? Then you come to the second part, which is the affordability, because sometimes we even have accessibility, but you don't have affordability. And here we need to work together. And finally, then you have the usability. You need a device. You need an application. And okay, Netflix is great, but you want telemedicine, remote learning, the right curriculum, the right content on that. So it's actually a combination, and that's why when I'm speaking, it's so important that we have that collaboration in between us. We understand that the broadband and accessibility is what we can do and how we should help you to get it. The affordability is probably something we need to work together. And then the usability is also something we need to work together. So you have a device. We have deployed in many schools across the country what we call the Verizon Innovative Learning, invested $500 million. And that's both in broadband and in the device, as well as in a STEM digital education. And we did it, all three of them, in order to see that actually the school will have it forever. At the same time, we do the maintenance with our volunteers. But that's not enough. We all need to do more together, and I think that's why we have this conversation.
Thank you, Hans. I'd like to go over to Mayor Turner of Houston. Mr. Mayor, and talk to you and ask you about workforce development. After Hurricane Harvey, Houston made significant investments in workforce development on some major projects like Texas Central and Sunnyside Solar Farm. How important do you believe those type of investments will be post-COVID-19 to ensure a strong economic recovery?
Well, let me just say, thank you all for having me. It's good to be with the other mayors as well. This is critically important. Prior to Hurricane Harvey, prior to this pandemic, there was already a divide that existed within our country. I know when I came in as mayor 4 or 5 years ago, I said I didn't want to be the mayor of two cities in one. The reality is those inequities existed prior to. What Hurricane Harvey and what this pandemic have highlighted is the degree to which that divide exists, which means all of the things, for example, that Mayor Gallego and Hans just spoke about, that digital divide, that digital illiteracy, as I put it, those are accentuating the problems that we exist today. So during this pandemic, when we asked people, for example, to stay home, that there were many people who were able to work remotely from home. But at the same time, there were many frontline workers who were not, when you say go home and not stay at home, these were individuals who had to show up at their jobs in order to take care of their bills, take care of their families. And many of them, for example, are showing up in the stats of people who have contracted COVID, and many of whom have died. And many of these people are people of color. So what we learned after Hurricane Harvey, for example, as we work to build a more sustainable, stronger city, is that we had to provide workforce opportunities for many people who did not have these skills to take advantage of these new opportunities that were brought about as we work to strengthen and build a more sustainable city. And that's what we're finding with this pandemic, is that we're having to reimagine and establish additional opportunities. And what that means is that we have to focus on reskilling or upskilling in order to put people in the best position to take advantage of these opportunities. Otherwise, that divide, that income divide, you name it, in so many areas, that only increases. As we talk about, for example, after Hurricane Harvey, recognizing that climate change is real, okay? And then we're focusing on our first climate action plan, which means that we're focusing even more on renewables, which creates even more job opportunities. We have to make sure that people are prepared to take advantage of those opportunities. And that all leads to the workforce development. And that's one of the things that we highlighted in our economic recovery plan that we put forth under President Fisher's leadership. And that is, if you don't talk about workforce development, if you don't talk about training, if you don't talk about reskilling and upskilling, then the divide that exists within our country will get even greater, and that will lead to many more problems as well. So it's critical as we build a city, a state, a country for the future, recognizing that divides existed before, but they've been exacerbated by what we're facing now.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to go over to Dave Gitlin. And Dave, as CEO of Carrier, you guys spun out of United Technologies earlier this year, which is a pretty incredible story unto itself. But I want to just shift and ask you a little bit about what businesses in your portfolio sort of speak to the issues that we're discussing here today and might actually go towards resolving some of the things that we're discussing?
Well, thanks, Andy. And Hans, thanks for having me. Thanks to the mayors for all that you're doing. If you look at Carrier, as you just said, we spun from United Technologies on April 3rd. So you can think of us as a 100-year-old startup because Willis Carrier invented modern air conditioning in 1902. And here we are, we've been our own public company for only 6 months. So we're in the first inning. It's been an exciting run, but our business is composed of HVAC, fire and security, and refrigeration. And our entire portfolio really goes to the heart of making a difference for the mayors and their communities. One of the biggest challenges in cities across the country is getting people confident in coming back into public indoor settings. And whether that's a restaurant or commercial office building, I know Joe's on, but venues are, across his enterprise. But what we need to do is give people confidence that when you are in an indoor environment, it's just as safe as you would feel if you were outdoors. So what we do at Carrier is provide things like healthy, safe, and sustainable buildings, then ventilation systems, filtration systems, provide that ecosystem where we can give consumers confidence about the indoor air environment. And what you can picture in the future, hopefully very soon, is a scoring system. So before you go into a restaurant, there can be a gold, silver, and bronze kind of level that can tell a consumer, am I in a safe and healthy indoor environment? And you will have that scoring system fairly ubiquitous, whether it's in a K through 12 school or a university. And we're out in front of providing those solutions.
Great. Interesting stuff there. Amir Garcetti, over to you. I wanted to ask you about testing because it really is not just a health issue, but also one that has huge economic implications. The USCM Economic Recovery Working Group calls for FEMA and DoD to coordinate with state and local governments to increase nationwide testing and availability of tests to mitigate supply gaps. What lessons are we learning from the pandemic, and what measures has LA already put into place to ensure the city is more prepared and can respond and adapt to another crisis like COVID-19 in the future?
Well, how much time do we have? First of all, let me tell you, Andy, thank you for having me here, and thank you to my fellow mayors, everybody who's part of this from the private sector as well, and to you too, David. Look, I think you all in business know that you're defined not by what you set out to do and how well you do it, but what you don't expect to happen and how well you respond. By that measure, I'm very proud of my fellow mayors who are way outside of our kind of jurisdiction, our job description. Usually cities don't have their own health departments. That's usually a county or state responsibility. The funds come from the feds or from state level. And we really had to kind of go our own way. We had to be literally entrepreneurial. And in Los Angeles, I didn't want to wait to watch others do it. I kind of just jumped in and we started figuring it out. We assessed what sort of resources we had. And in emergency, Los Angeles, I think out of the 9 categories of FEMA disasters, we qualify for 8 of them. People don't know, but we have things like tornadoes here, obviously fires, earthquakes, floods, all of that. And so we're have a lot of muscle memory for responding to disasters, but not one like this. America clearly didn't have any muscle memory for what a pandemic feels like. So I was just actually on a call with a reporter from GQ who's writing a story about how we stood up our testing in Los Angeles. Every city has a health department called our fire department. We call them fire departments, but 90% of the time they're responding to a health call, transporting a patient, dealing with a medical issue. 10% of the time, thank God, they're there to fight fires. So we mobilized them, started testing them, looked for procuring tests from existing companies, and then invested in early companies that were jumping out and found one here in the Southland, Curative, that we secured contract with, and we became the first large city in America not only to offer widespread testing, but then to be the first to do widespread testing to people without symptoms, to have strike teams that went into everything from homeless encampments to our skilled nursing facilities, so that we cut our senior deaths by about 82%. First place to mandate that. It was a combination of our power to mandate things and our power to procure and to convene. For instance, the Port of Los Angeles is the busiest container port in the Americas. So I took my executive director, Gene Soroka, who came from private industry and from shipping, and said, "You're our chief logistics officer. Go sort through the 10,000 emails that we get about everybody who knows somebody who's going to get you some N95 masks and everything else, and actually figure it out. And it was in Mayor Gallego's city where we were able to work with Honeywell, for instance, and for 73 cents when people were paying $7, $15 per mask, get American-made masks that we then bought for all the hospitals in Los Angeles and gave out at cost. So we've really had to be very entrepreneurial. And I've tried to also, with the U.S. Conference of Mayors and President Fisher's leadership, also look at what we can do to look at whatever the next is. I recently met with the Surgeon General in my backyard here in Los Angeles, helped get through Admiral Giroir and him some of the new paper strip testing, because I think critical for business, critical for schools, is going to be a cheaper and a quicker test. We've been very lucky. We have about a 24-hour turnaround time on our PCR tests. But for most of this crisis throughout America, it's been a 7-8 day turnaround time, at which point the spread has already occurred. Paper strip testing, which uses antigen testing, may be about 50% as sensitive. But if you can do it daily for $1 to $5 instead of $150 per test, you could look at schools actually being tested, the teachers, the staff, and the students. And so we rolled out the first pilot of that just last week, together with the Rockefeller Foundation, with help actually from the feds finally. I always praise the feds when they offer help. I also always criticize them when they haven't been there. And I know Mayor Gallego and others have experienced that too. But bottom line, we've learned how to act like, the CEOs that many of our charters describe us as being. You don't accept no, you sometimes twist arms, you sometimes convene, and you sometimes have formal power. But you've got to be nimble, you've got to fail forward, don't worry about the criticism, and save as many lives as you can.
Mr. Mayor, I see the CEOs nodding their heads at that last point you made about twisting arms. I guess it's a skill set that is blending at this point, given the crisis that's going on. I want to go over to Joe Berchtold, who is the president of Live Nation. And boy, Joe runs one of these businesses that's just been really decimated by COVID. And we feel for you, Joe. I mean, it's tough because we all want to go to your concerts too. So I think everyone would really like all these types of things to get back online. But obviously, we've got a way to go. And in terms of some of the things that Amir Garcetti was talking about, testing, trying to understand the health implications of getting people together. Talk to us about where you are in the process and where you see the company standing and going at this point.
Thanks, Andy. Appreciate the opportunity to join you and the mayors and my colleagues from the private sector. I think the comments that Mayor Garcetti made as well as David made are spot on in terms of how we think about coming out of this. And the next 6 months are going to be in many respects as challenging as we get into the cold weather in terms of how do we progress. And overwhelmingly, the way we look at it is there are two things that we need to get people back in buildings. One is we need to make sure those buildings are safe. When we've done our fan surveys, overwhelmingly what they've said is they want the confidence that the building's been cleaned, that it will remain clean, and they have access to hand sanitizer. That's far and away the most important thing. So working with David's team and others like them, I think we've got good plans in place so that we're very clear on having the buildings clean. Then the second is how do we have our fans, our artists, our employees be safe when they're there, or how do we have people in a restaurant or school or other places where people can gather? And obviously every market is different. We have hundreds of mayors on right now, and some have a much lower incidence rate. But being here in LA, along with Mayor Garcetti, I think we need, first of all, very clear objective criteria that we know what the rules of the road are. The uncertainty is the bane of a business's existence. We can't make decisions without some clarity, without some objective metrics, without knowing what we're getting ourselves into. We're seeing that we're paying the price in the state with that, with Disney's announcements this week, where they've stated we're laying off tens of thousands of people because we don't know where it's going. So we need those clear objective criteria. And then I agree with Mayor Garcetti. We need the testing and the tracing so that we can safely get people into the building. And with the developments that are going on in rapid testing, the paper tests that he talked about, the other tests, working with our local governments to figure out what is the effectiveness of that test. If that test done every morning will let a student go to a school for confidence for 8 hours, or enter a restaurant with confidence for 4 hours, or a concert with confidence for 3 or 4 hours, then that's a huge step forward. And we need the tracing because not all of it's going to be perfect. But it's only through now the proactive steps, right? We've spent so much of the last 6 months, and as Mayor Garcetti said, nobody was prepared for this in March, and everybody did their best, and everybody got some things right and some things wrong. But now we're looking forward. And so how do we shift from being on our back foot to a more proactive stance that over the next period, because we can't control the timing of the vaccine, the development and the rollout, how do we take more control now so that over the next 4 to 6 months, we're able to start to gather? And again, this all tie back, as you want to get into, to the economic divide, to the inequity, the millions of people that are out of work in these industries because people can't gather.
Great. Thank you so much, Joe. We're rooting for you. I do want to remind the mayors watching that they can submit their questions. We'll be going to those pretty soon. Before we do that, we have time for several more questions, and I want to go over to the president, Mayor Fisher, and ask you a question about funding, because I know this has been on everyone's mind, but you've been talking about this a bit in terms of state and local and federal funding, calling for some emergency federal funding to address the pandemic and the implications in your city and others in terms of job losses and economic hardship. Tell us about the economic situation in Louisville and how you are working to address the financial challenges that you guys face there.
All right, thanks, Andy. And I think what I'm going to describe in Louisville is not dissimilar from what my fellow mayors are seeing around the country as well. So there's a lot of challenges that have been brought along through this pandemic. We talked about inequities in both income and wealth that existed before the pandemic. They've been exacerbated during this pandemic. So what we're seeing is unemployment is increasing. We're seeing businesses, especially small businesses, struggling. And then we're seeing a potential wave of evictions coming upon us as well. So to address that, we've created a small business grant program for businesses impacted by COVID-19. It's a $50,000 grant. I mean, what we're just trying to do right now is let people survive, so they can get to the other side of this pandemic, whatever that's going to look like and whenever it's going to come. We focus in particular, as I mentioned, on small businesses, but also on women, minority, and disabled owned businesses. We're exceeding our targets in those areas so we can impact the equity challenges that I mentioned about. So far, we've impacted about 600 small businesses with that category. And then as it relates to evictions, there's a lot of confusion in the country around moratorium on evictions, whether or not eviction or rent is going to be forgiven or whether it's just being delayed, and that's the basic problem, it's being delayed. So we have also set up a program to help people with their rent so that they can stay in their apartments, as well as working with legal aid to set up a diversion program that acts as a backstop for people that are facing challenges because of COVID-19. What we found is on average in Louisville, people owe about $3,300 in back rent right now. So it's not going away. It's going to be a continued problem so far. So we've been able to help thousands of people in that category. We're at a time right now where we're waiting on Washington, D.C. to see if there will be a direct relief program for all cities and counties. The first one that came out, the CARES Act, was for cities that were over 500,000 in population. So all of the mayors on this call had the benefit of receiving that type of assistance. But cities that are small and big are hurting right now. The depth of this economic impact, as we've covered on this call, has been nowhere near addressed by the money that's been put out so far. And so D.C. is in the, hopefully, we've heard the past couple of days, there's a revival of some hope on the possibility of a deal to get direct aid to cities and towns across the country. And it's just absolutely necessary, not just for the overall economy, but then for our city and county employees as well. So the irony of this would be the very firefighters, the public health workers, the emergency management folks that we've depended on, our police officers. If we don't get that type of direct aid for revenue replacement to our cities, their jobs are in danger. So while you see a lot of resiliency and fight at the city levels, I don't want to discount the enormity of the challenges that we're facing as well.
Thank you, Mayor Fisher. Hans, I want to go over to you and ask you about some economic megatrends, specifically AI and globalization, automation. How can the mayors work together with the private sector to address that in terms of the changing workforce?
Thank you. No, I think when it comes to that type of things, and I see, I mean, I've been working with the sort of society. I started actually working with the Millennium Development Goals in 2006 and seeing how the private sector can support them. And one thing that I've seen over the last 15 years from the private sector is the big engagement to work with societies and communities. We can probably do more and even faster, but clearly it is a movement dramatically on the private sector, how they understand that society is part of our stakeholders, our four stakeholders: employees, shareholders, customers, and society. So I think there is a combination here to be done to work. What I usually say to government, states, or if it's a municipality or a city, it's always contribution in kind is what the private sector really want to do. We want to use our people to be part of solving something that is a challenge in society. We want to use our products. And we think, of course, that philanthropy is great and we should do that. But clearly, when I look at my company, we are committed now to 2.5 million hours of volunteerism in the next couple of years. We want to dedicate that to things that is part of our strategy going forward: the digital divide, human prosperity, climate change. And I think that's where we're going to find also the work we need to do for the next generation workforce. We are super interested to develop capabilities when it comes to STEM, AI, and all these new acronyms that is the next generation's competencies together with everyone. That's how, because then we have, both of us have the same objectives. And I think that is important. And early on this pandemic, we started this exchange of jobs between all the corporations in order, because some are more hit, like Joe's organization, super hit by the pandemic. My company, much less hit, because you need infrastructure in mobility and broadband right now. So we need to help each other to move resources in between us as well, because we might have a shortage right now and others have actually excess. And all that plays into the private and public discussion that we need to have. But clearly, when it serves our purpose together with the purpose of the mayors, that's the best way. And we all need to have the next generation capabilities built into our workforce.
Thank you, Hans. I want to go back to some of the mayors and maybe go around the horn a little bit and ask them about jobs, because really that's the whole ball game here. And Mayor Gallego, why don't I start with you and ask you what you're doing to try to build back employment in your city?
Certainly on the mind of every mayor in the country. We want to come back stronger and smarter. I was pleased to work with Mayors Garcetti and Turner on our vision for how we can reimagine the future. And we are hoping in areas maybe familiar to David, we're going to be investing more in green technology, better built buildings with better technology, so that not only are we employing people as we do that, but we have investments for the long term that meet our community needs and are more responsible for our greenhouse gas emissions. We are also just thinking about what jobs are likely to return and what are not. In some cases, as Mayor Turner suggested, we've really, as mayors, focused on upskilling and how we can take people from the jobs that they had before the pandemic to ones that might be more fulfilling and meaningful. At the City of Phoenix, we're looking at if we can particularly invest in single parents. We believe we will have even greater dividends, that it won't help just the job seeker, but an entire family and our next generation. So trying to think long term and not just how do we get people back working right away, but how do we help entire families and prioritize with limited resources. We continue to do our traditional economic development, and Phoenix has had some neat announcements, including a major semiconductor facility that announced they were coming to Phoenix during the pandemic. So those always feel good as a mayor, that people are still interested in investing in your community. But we know we have to be smarter and more nimble. In Phoenix, we have some areas such as computer scientists where there are now more postings than job seekers. But then we have hospitality workers where there are 20 people seeking every single job that's open. So how can we work with our hospitality workers to get good training, and then also invest in things like healthcare navigators or connectors to make sure those individuals keep benefits or get new ones if they are separated from their jobs. Today's a hard day for all of the mayors who are featured today. We all have major airports that are significant employers seeing very tough layoffs as a result of federal government not extending aid in that area. So we are also trying to just push and say it has to be a partnership. Cities are going to do what we can and invest in, from small businesses to traditional larger employers, but we need the federal government to step up. Like Mayor Fisher, we have had good luck with supporting our smallest businesses. There's been some tough statistics out there saying that, including our Hispanic Chamber is worried that half of our Latino-owned businesses are vulnerable and might be lost during the pandemic. So we've done aid grants, a small business hotline, helped them get PPE. Our most popular YouTube video in city history appears to be our guide to getting the PPP plans. When the federal government first put that out, everyone was confused. How do you apply? What paperwork do you need? What do you need to know to submit your application? If you don't have a bank ready, how do you get connected? And so we did a video originally on our public access cable, but then on YouTube, and it broke city records for watching, just because businesses are also starving for information. And so we set up a small business hotline and have called thousands of them and are asking them, how can we help you protect jobs? And our best ideas have come from that, which have been things as small as safety advice for restaurants to restart to bigger multi-million-dollar investment programs. We have a lot of smart folks in our community, and we're just trying to listen to them.
A lot going on there, including red hot YouTube videos. I love it. Let me go over to Mayor Turner and ask you about jobs, and maybe you can think a little bit about infrastructure and how that is actually coming into play here as well, because I know that's top of mind for you and Mayor Gallego.
Infrastructure is very critical for us, and I will tell you, even after Harvey, we've worked very hard to get all of our priority infrastructure projects approved, and it takes collaboration with all units of government, federal, state, local, the private sector, and I'm pleased to report that the 4 priority projects that we designed have all been approved by FEMA, funded and in the design phase, and that will create job opportunities. At the same time, it will help to mitigate the risk of flooding. So we're very proud about that. I am still hopeful that the federal government will respond and provide additional assistance that will help to hold on to jobs that currently exist. The reality is that without businesses, you don't have the jobs. I mean, so you got to have your businesses. But in terms of infrastructure, we're moving forward on those infrastructure projects as it relates to flood mitigation. Just had a meeting this morning with my team in reference to some additional infrastructure projects that will be major for the city of Houston, that we're seeking now approval again from the federal government. So we're looking forward to moving forward on that front. With respect to transit, for example, we're trying to follow the lead of Amir Garcetti and what they're doing out in LA and building a high-speed train. And we've gotten a week or so ago, gotten the sign off on the ROD, the record of decision, and FEIS. We're still looking forward to building this high-speed train from Houston to Dallas. That's a 4+ year project, creating 10,000 jobs a year. So we're excited about that. The voters last November approved our own local Metro Next program. I want to thank again Eric, because he provided some assistance in helping us getting that passed, and that passed overwhelmingly by the voters. Because in Houston, we are a large city, 640 square miles, but the focus has always been on road capacity, building roads. Where we're reimagining the city of Houston, because we recognize you just can't build road capacity and build your way out of it and address climate change and other things at the same time. So we have to be smarter. So the focus is now on more multimodal development, building now a more walkable, pedestrian-friendly city. So we're focusing on those things as well. But even in terms, for example, about water treatment plants, we're doing some things on that front. That's a multi-billion-dollar operation. But those are things that have to be addressed. So it's no question infrastructure is critical. We just approved my street rehabilitation program to speed things up quite a bit. Roads can get bad unless you provide the right maintenance. So we're focusing on that. Bridges need to be repaired, retrofitted. That's critically important, and it affects everything that we do. In terms of renewables, you may mention at the very beginning, we have landfills in this city that's been here for a long time. In one case, 300 contaminated acres. We are taking that and turning that into the largest urban solar farm in the country. So we're looking forward to that. So there are a number of projects that we are doing that enhance our quality of life, mitigate the risk of flooding, reduce the concerns of climate change, create jobs, and good paying, high quality jobs. We just need to make sure that we are preparing the workforce to take advantage of the opportunities that come about.
Great. And I love the collaboration between the mayors, and get the thumbs up from Mayor Garcetti. And Mayor Garcetti, we'll get to you in 1 second, but I just want to check in with Dave Gitlin, because I'm curious just to follow up a little bit on the cold chain and the cold supply chain when it comes to the vaccine. I find that fascinating. What sort of conversations are you actually having right now with pharma companies, and how ready are you, and how soon do you think these vaccines will actually be traveling the roads?
We're discussing with not only the pharma companies, but also the distributors and federal government, state governments, on when there is vaccines available, how is it going to get effectively distributed? Because we provide the cold chain solutions there. Mayor Garcetti mentioned port out in LA, but when you go there and you see refrigerated containers, those are our refrigeration units. We have more than 50% market share in the refrigeration units that cool containers and trucks and trailers. So if you think about the problem statement, today with flu shots, only about 40% of Americans actually get the flu shot, and it's sort of distributed throughout the fall. If you think about the criticality, not only in the United States, but globally, of once there is a vaccine, having that distributed in a safe refrigerated environment throughout the entire cycle is going to be really precedent setting in the challenge and the opportunity, because once it hits ambient temperature, once it hits room temperature, it has to be administered within 6 hours. So we are working with a number of different players in this cycle. Next week, we'll be announcing a major partnership with the leading cloud provider to work on data, which perhaps maybe I did just announce, but we'll be announcing it next week, on a partnership to really gather the data, ensure that the vaccines are distributed in a safe, refrigerated manner to the end customer. And then just one other comment, if I may, Andy, is just picking up on what Mayors Gallego and Turner said about sustainability, and Mayor Garcetti's comments about climate change. If you think about the challenge there, 40% of the world's global carbon emissions come from buildings, and 40% of that from the HVAC system. So you cannot address climate change without coming out with more energy efficient solutions. And when you talk about infrastructure spending like Mayor Gallego did in Phoenix, that we can absolutely be part of the solution to address not only jobs and criticality of safe, sustainable, and healthy buildings, but you cannot address climate change without actually addressing more energy efficient HVAC systems.
Great, thanks, Dave. A lot going on there. So Mayor Garcetti, so much to talk about with LA, but one thing I'm curious about is small businesses. I mean, you must have thousands, if not millions, of small businesses in your city. Obviously, Mayor Gallego was talking about how hard hit they are in her city, and of course the same thing's true for you, I'm sure. So how are you beginning to address that? It's a lot tougher to disperse funds and help them, and then actually looking beyond COVID to inspiring the next generation of entrepreneurs.
Thank you for that question. This has been an extraordinary conversation, really been good. If I can pick up on a couple points and then let me address that too, but I'll start with your question because sometimes elected officials, we wander to other things first. We are the small business kind of capital of America. We have plenty of Fortune 500 companies in Southern California and in the city of LA, but we're really a startup culture and a small business culture. And we're hit. I'm the grandson of two small business owners, a barber and a tailor, who started a clothing company here in Southern California. We're still a manufacturing capital of America as well, something people don't know about Los Angeles. But I'll tell you, we need to really focus on who starts these businesses up. So you can't just go into this in kind of a neutral way. Too many people had no access to the banking to get the PPP loans. Too many immigrant-run businesses, Black-owned businesses, sometimes aren't even incorporated in the way that makes them eligible for these loans. And yet they also face some very surmountable challenges. For instance, we're looking at a tech core, to your jobs question, that would roll out young people who right now are in community college but have to have them choose between going to school and supporting their families in this pandemic. But they can roll out on main streets and just help businesses get a square connected to their cell phone so they can actually do mobile payments and contactless commerce. What the big companies have done such a great job at, and I really want to praise those corporations that have stepped up and made their customers and their employees feel safe. But all the small businesses that are just dying off in America, 1 out of 6 gone already, 60% thinking they won't make it in towns like ours. That also has a huge impact on setting us back on racial justice. Look at my city, over 60% of businesses are started by immigrants. Our Black-owned businesses, our Latino-owned businesses, veterans, women-owned businesses are really where the biggest growth was happening. And they're also the most vulnerable. So we're looking at community colleges in particular, where you can get skills, and back to your jobs question, not just for entrepreneurialism and small businesses, but for those, green infrastructure jobs of tomorrow. I always like giving mayors and TOs people playbooks. So I would say a couple things. One, I put in the chat on the infrastructure, which Mayor Turner was talking about, with other mayors, CEOs, and union leaders and community leaders. We started something called Accelerator for America on infrastructure and put forward a playbook of what we should be doing to invest in the sort of infrastructure that can bring those businesses back and create jobs. And clearly it's in the green sector, it's in transportation, it's in buildings, to your point, Dave. Building, you're right. It's much easier to just do efficiency than to build new power plants, even if they are 100% green. That still takes a lot of resources to do, even if solar plants like the one we're building are cheaper than new natural gas plants. It takes a lot of resources. So why not have a green core in your city that goes and helps building owners save money, it pays for those jobs, and it helps us with global warming. Look at this tech core like we're doing, and a care core. Groups of folks that can go out right now in this pandemic. And we still have, a quarter to a tenth the number of contact tracers as our counterparts in places like in countries in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in South Asia. It's embarrassing. The United States of America, with so many people out of work, can't figure out a way to double, triple, quadruple the contact tracing, because there will be tough. We're not out of the woods yet. And then those people can be transferred into what I call the care economy jobs, which we're putting a big emphasis on. And we've seen one presidential candidate also roll out, whether it's childcare, whether it's senior care. We've come through the critical it is to have the care economy lifted up, professionalized, well paid, but also well trained, and how that can help us get out of something like this so that we're not 4.5% of the world's population and 25% of their deaths. Lastly, and my apologies for picking up the phone in the midst of this, that was actually Secretary Mnuchin, which gives me hope that there's things that are moving. I do believe that, election aside, and I know this is a crazy moment because there's 33 days of everybody losing their heads, whether it is the current administration continuing or a new administration coming in, we really do need national leadership on all of these things. We need national leadership when it comes to protocols for testing. To your point, Joe, we're working, for instance, with a startup here that's doing home testing for not just COVID, but for flu and colds in a single test that you could then sync up to your smartphone, get the results right back, anonymized so people don't have your personal data. But then we have to sync it up to a third-party trusted certificate company that could then go to a concert, and you could scan it in and say, I've been tested and within the last 24 hours and I'm clear and clean to go. You could do that in buildings. But just as we have certificates that are trusted by internet protocols, we need to do that for health protocols. We need to have the protocols for how we administer the new tests that are coming out. And those things, I think, is where the federal government has a unique role to play. No city can do this. No corporation or industry can do it on their own. So I just want to put that in there on top of the jobs and infrastructure points I was making as well.
Thank you, Amir Garcetti. And I love the phone call point. That's great.
Yeah. Andy, I need to jump off. Andy.
Okay. Thank
Just want to
you.
thank everybody for the call and just remind everybody, let's be thinking about what our future of work initiatives are as well. How we're going to be changed by artificial intelligence and data science and the Internet of Things. While all of this chaos is going on around us, those areas are accelerating more and more. So I know many of us have future of work initiatives in our city, so I wanted to throw that in at the end there. So Hans and Verizon, I wanted to say thank you to you all. I'm just sorry I've got to jump off now and get into something else. So thank you. God bless.
Thanks. Yeah, maybe Secretary Mnuchin's got to call Greg now. So, last quick question to you, Joe. You're in LA. You've been in the entertainment business, and so just what's the mood like when you talk to your fellow executives there in terms of getting back up on your feet?
Yeah, everybody's committed to getting back. We've talked about a lot of big problems today and have alluded to a lot of problems, and all the mayors on the panel and elsewhere in the audience obviously are facing a range of huge issues. And us in the entertainment area, on some level, you can say, well, that's a nice to have. That's not that relevant in the scheme of everything we're facing. But we like to think that it is important. First of all, I spoke earlier, there are 12 million people who are employed in the entertainment industry, and they're some of the first to lose their jobs and last to come back. And so as we talk about the economic realities, those are some hard-hit people. We also know that that people are social animals. People need to gather. There are a whole host of statistics about the incredible impact on mental health that there's been over the past 6 months. And whether it's gathering at a concert, a restaurant, a bar, a movie, or even a school, is a critical socialization. And so we do think that what we're doing is important and will matter coming out of this. And we're investing in exactly what Mayor Garcetti was talking about, using with our ticketing technology, tying in so that at our events, or happy to share with others, you can demonstrate that you have followed the safety precautions that come in and have it be safe. And we're very excited about getting back and doing that sooner versus later. And obviously love working with all of our local communities. We, at the end of the day, are a very local business. Fans go to their local buildings to see their favorite acts. And we've obviously here in LA had a long relationship with Amir Garcetti, and I know work with a number of you elsewhere throughout the country. We appreciate that.
All right, we're going to have to wrap things up right now. Thank you very much, Joe and Dave and Mayors Gallego, Garcetti, and Turner. Now I want to turn things over to Hans Vestberg for some final thoughts. Hans.
I will not try to summarize this rich conversation. I would like to thank the USCM for convening this, and I, of course, would like to thank all the mayors joining the panel here and the private sector to have this conversation. It's obvious that we have many challenges around us, and it doesn't matter if you're a big city or a small city or a country or if you're a private sector. And the only way to solve this, actually, we need to learn from each other to make this quicker. We need to see that each and everyone on this planet have the same chance. And I think the only way to do that is to work together with the public and private. And I can only say that the private sector, we feel a huge responsibility for doing this right. And that's what I'm trying to secure. And that's why I thought it was so important to have this first conversation. As you know, we're going to have this every week now through October. And on different topics with different mayors, with different private sector players, all in all to just spur this discussion that we need to have and bringing this forward. I learned a ton today. I've taken a lot of notes. I'm going to call my organization and tell them, hey, we need to do this. We need to talk to that mayor. And I think that's how it needs to be. And if somebody feels they need to call Verizon, you know where I am and you know where we are. Because we understand that we have a huge responsibility in this. So once again, thank you all. And we talk a lot about the new normal. I wish we think it's going to be the new better. It is so many problems and so many challenges that people are facing right now, and we all know it. And we know it's going to be something new on the other side, and I wish that we can make it together to something new, better for all. So once again, thank you all for joining this rich conversation, and see you next week, hopefully in the same conversation with a new topic.
Thanks, Hans.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.